Assalamualaikum and every good afternoon. Hope you have a good lunch and also a good plenary session earlier. Okay, before I commence this deep dive workshop on clean hydrogen fueling a low carbon future, a little bit of context setting and then also some housekeeping announcement. Our session is supposed to run for about 75 minutes. Now we only got about 1 hour. And then each panelist will be given about 5 minutes, maybe plus minus 8 minutes. You got more things to say. And of course, we kick off with Krishnan from Bain, who will do actually setting the context for the conversation. And then after that, Yuji San, will come in as the first panelist, followed by Joseph, and also Adalan will be the last panelist to speak. Briefly, today we talk about the world is facing a confluence of crises. You name it, you heard from the previous session about the elevated inflation, weather-related events, geopolitical crisis, and a host of other crises, high cost of living crisis. Those are the kind of things that we are actually facing today. And then we heard about the short-term or immediate focus today, which is on energy security. And then the demand for oil and gas is very, very high. Oil and gas, fossil fuels, coal, actually in high demand today. And then, but let's not lose sight of the end state, which is the, we call it global energy transition. And then we talk about the world today, which is pivoting towards this low carbon future. And then again, at the same time, there are growing concerns about climate change, actually, which have driven governments and industry players to actually commit themselves to this net zero end state, some as early as 2050, some as by 2060. And then, in fact, during the opening by Yan Ahmad Muhammad, Prime Minister, in the morning, he also said about the need for Malaysia to lay the foundation towards the net zero end state, and then how Malaysia can play its role in producing green hydrogen. On this target, we expect to see more partnerships, more collaboration, and also more investments in clean hydrogen, and also especially in hard-to-abate sectors, and also in some new applications. This brings me to this topic for deep dive today on clean hydrogen, a key energy source for low carbon future. And while hydrogen, Krishnan is going to talk about hydrogen later on. Hydrogen is odorless, colorless, tasteless, but everyone can smell the money, right? So here we're going to hear how our panelists are going to talk about where the money is going to come from, and where it's going to be spent later on. And then we are trying actually our best to make sure that all the panelists will deliver their key insights, their views, their narrative in a concise manner, keeping in mind all the time that's available. And then we will also reserve some time for participants to actually ask questions later on. So without much ado, I would like now to invite Krishnan to do the content setting. And then Krishnan, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. Very good. I was told by the chair before this session started that my 10 minutes had turned into 5 minutes, which for a consultant is extremely difficult to achieve, but I will try and work through these pages as quickly as possible. My name is Krishnan Narayanan. I'm an advisor with Bain & Company. I've spent most of the last decade advising and investing in renewable energy, clean energy, and hydrogen. And my job today is to set a little bit of context before handing over to the other panelists. If we could move to the presentation, please. So if we move to the first slide. The purpose of this 5 minutes or so is to help with 5 questions. And those questions are very important context in understanding where hydrogen stands today, why this is such an important part of our clean energy future, and where we think Malaysia stands in terms of being part of the hydrogen economy and the hydrogen future. So why don't we start with what hydrogen actually is on the next page. Sorry, 2 seconds. Thank you very much. So, hydrogen is, as you probably all know, the lightest and most abundant molecule in the universe and on Earth. And it has been used in gray form for many decades as an input into industrial processes, so refining oil, for example, for the last 40 years. And grey hydrogen, which is an unclean form of hydrogen, constitutes the vast majority of the supply of hydrogen out there today. Now, there are many other different colors and types of hydrogen, but the two that get most people excited are green hydrogen, which is produced by electrolysis, so by using electricity to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, and as a transition hydrogen, blue hydrogen, which uses the same process as grey, but is supplemented by carbon capture technology in order to capture the CO2 emissions that come from the production of hydrogen. As it stands, you look at the supply from left to right, and you look at the average cost from left to right, and you can understand why grey is highly abundant and green far less so. Now, why are people getting very excited about hydrogen as a clean energy source? Well, it's a couple of reasons. So first of all, it's because if you look at the energy transition picture from 2020 to 2050, what we're hoping for is that the global energy-related CO2 emissions will actually stay fairly constant in that time. But if we try and reduce all of the CO2 emissions that we have today from renewable energy and energy efficiency and electrification, we won't get there. There will be a residual of about 30% of current emissions, which we will not be able to get rid of through those methods. And those methods are, as I'm sure you've heard today in other sessions, pretty tried and tested. They don't really have many technology challenges, and we can foresee that happening relatively smoothly. But in order to reach full decarbonization, we are going to require green hydrogen, or will want to require green hydrogen, to address those hard-to-abate sectors, which include industrial feedstock, which include transportation, and which include power and industrial energy. And green hydrogen can be used in all of those processes in one way or another, and that's why people are getting very excited about this clean energy source, and particularly have been over the last couple of years. That excitement has actually been fueled and translated into some pretty significant developments over the last couple of years. So on the left-hand side, we see a significant amount of policy support for hydrogen, which certainly did not exist a decade ago. And when people ask, look, is this dawning of hydrogen as a clean energy source real? Why is it different this time? This is one of the major reasons for it. We see the EU putting in billions of dollars per annum into clean hydrogen over the next 10 years. Secondly, and critically, one of the major reasons that electrolysis and the generation of green hydrogen was pretty much impossible 10 years ago in any kind of cost-effective manner was that the source for that electrolysis, so solar energy, renewable energy, was exceptionally expensive. We now look at decreasing renewable costs over the last 10 years and beyond, and renewable energy is in some places, and will certainly be in other places, the cheapest source of energy over the course of the next few years, and that means that green hydrogen is in fact a possibility. This isn't all going to happen immediately, and one of the things that we panelists were discussing beforehand is that there's balance here. So we're not going to see green hydrogen becoming abundantly used in all geographies and in all applications immediately. If you look at the picture over the next 30 years or so, we're going to see more and more hydrogen being used, and a greater percentage of that being clean hydrogen over time. The expectation and hope is that in the 2050s, that all of the hydrogen used, and there'll be a significant amount, will be clean hydrogen, mainly green hydrogen. But as you can see, there's definitely a picture of evolution over time. And even in the 2030s, 2040s, we're going to see hydrogen reaching cost parity, with people being increasingly willing to pay and more infrastructure, but uptake is still going to be relatively low. So there's a long way to go here, and patience required. I think in keeping with that, it's important to understand what some of the major challenges are here when it comes to green hydrogen becoming an abundant clean energy source. And they're real. So first of all, if we look at the supply, there are only a 1 gigawatt or less of operational electrolyzers today, and that supply has to increase in order to bring down the cost curve. Secondly, there are some very significant technology challenges still. To give you one example, hydrogen doesn't transport well. It does actually transport quite well as ammonia. However, there is still a clear challenge in cracking the ammonia at source when you want to use it again, and the technology for that is still highly nascent. And by the way, that's true of liquefying hydrogen and also methane pyrolysis, which converts natural gas and biomethane into hydrogen. The maturing of those technologies is very, very important in achieving that picture that we showed across the 2020s and 2050s. Finally, and we'll talk about that in a minute more, we still need much more concerted policy support in order to make this happen across the world, including subsidies, including faster permitting, and indeed various stability of policies over time. We have the additional challenge at the moment that the world is in a pretty uncertain space. So the pandemic and various political and socioeconomic and social factors have made net zero targets much, much more of a necessity, both for corporations and for governments. And we've all been privy to that pressure over the course of the last couple of years. But there are many complications, and the war between Russia and Ukraine certainly has not helped. Each country is extremely concerned in most markets about energy security, which makes the transition to clean energy more complicated. And of course, countries are struggling with inflation and with helping their people through this crisis, which means that there are competing demands for subsidies and competing demands for government income and taxation, which makes it more difficult to accelerate the subsidization to hydrogen. That said, we are seeing governments put muscle behind hydrogen despite those other pressures. There are many governments that are doing this, and we're not seeking to single out a couple in particular, but it's interesting that the UK has been very concerted, as I think many of you will know, on pushing forward industrial clusters. The US, as I think Joseph may talk about more, has just made it much, much easier for hydrogen to be produced in country. And there are many different initiatives going on across the EU, and we saw some of the funding levels earlier. Which brings me nicely to Malaysia. I think we could probably spend an hour talking about how green hydrogen could play a role in the Malaysian economy, how important it is, and what Malaysia should do. We'll just leave you with a couple of thoughts. So first of all, Malaysia is actually, as it has been for many years, very well positioned to serve as both a source of domestic supply of hydrogen, but also as an exporter of hydrogen. And there is the need or the opportunity to decarbonize a significant amount of grey hydrogen used in country now, and it's a very, very credible regional demand center. Secondly, there are existing resources in country and capabilities that can be leveraged appropriately to make hydrogen work. There's hydropower, and actually there's a very significant, much more so per capita than most countries, reservoir of talent, which can be repurposed from traditional industries to hydrogen. But a lot of work needs to be done here as well as elsewhere. Companies will need to spearhead hydrogen, and I'm sure Ajit Adlan will talk about that more. And also, policy needs to be accelerated, be clear, and provide the kinds of funding mechanisms and opportunities for hydrogen to ramp up. Let me leave it there. I know we're in a bit of a rush, and let me hand over. But thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thanks, Krishnan, for that setting the tone. Before I pass the session to Yuichi, let me just summarize 1 or 2, 3 selling points from Krishnan. Hydrogen is critical to actually address about 30% of hard-to-abate sector, especially transportation. But what's needed is policy support and also lower RE costs, because we know today RE actually still prohibitively high, and especially to produce green hydrogen, it costs about $5 to $6 per kg as compared to blue hydrogen. But of course now to produce blue hydrogen is still expensive because the cost of natural gas now is expensive. And then demand for hydrogen to grow from about 90 to 120 MTPA now is 2020 to about more than 500 MTPA by 2050. And one interesting point here is that he mentioned about Malaysia is actually well positioned to actually start positioning for our own, we call it green hydrogen for domestic and also international demand. We're going to actually touch on Malaysia's readiness later on during the conversation, right after the last panel actually speaks. Okay, Yuichi-san, your floor, thanks.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yuichi Saotome of Sumitomo Corporation. Today, I would like to congratulate you on the successful 5th International Sustainable Energy Summit. I'm also very honored to have been the opportunity to give a presentation at such kind of the great international conference. Go to the presentation material, please. Okay. Today, I would like to explain our activities and direction of the decarbonization of Japan, which has a great potential of the sustainable fuels. First of all, I would like to briefly explain Sumitomo Corporation, which I belong. The Sumitomo Corporation is used to active mainly in trading, but now the form has changed significantly, and also very active in the investment company. With the 935 subsidiaries and related companies. As a group, around 75,000 employees are working now. Yeah, Sumitomo Corporation is also actively working on decarbonization as well, and established the energy innovation initiatives in 2021 to develop carbon-free energy and new power and energy transition. Oh, no, oh, sorry. Management, and also engage in carbon management through the forestry and CCS project. As a member of EII, I am responsible for the development of the hydrogen and hydrogen-related product in Southeast Asian Pacific region. Okay, now let's take a quick look at the Japanese hydrogen roadmap. Japanese government has declared carbon neutrality for 2050 and has released roadmap for it. One of the 5 pillars of the roadmap is the utilization of the hydrogen, and one of the pillars is the carbon recycling, including the CCS. With regard to hydrogen, there is an urgent need to establish a transportation method, such as liquid hydrogen, ammonia, or MCH, are all being studied all over the world. In addition, various studies are being conducted regarding the carbon recycling. as well. Okay. So it's a little bit difficult to see the this part, but you can see the red circle. So in addition, with regard to the specific target, activities are being carried out at various fields to procure 300,000 tons of the hydrogen at 2030, with a 30 yen per normal cubic meters. It's around the $3 per kilograms by 2030. And in order to do so, it is urgent to improve the efficiency of the electricity equipment, and also the all the field of the cost reduction is quite essential to achieve these numbers. In order to achieve this target successfully, Japanese government is supporting investment in various fields. Investment in various fields and budgeted 70 billion yen in 2021 and plans to invest 2 trillion yen over the next 10 years. So far, I have explained the Japanese hydrogen roadmap and carbon recycling, but sorry. I passed. Yep. But it's impossible to realize them without the cooperation of various concerned companies and governments. As I explain of such cooperation, I would like to explain about our project. Make it short. Okay. Now, Petronas and Japanese #1 energy company ENEOS and Sumitomo is considering to produce synthetic methane. The Japanese government target 1% of the total LNG demand in 2030. And also that Japanese government are thinking about the 90% of the total natural gas demand in Japan is replaced by the synthetic methane up until 2050. So we are now conducting the feasibility studies to realize this methanation project in Sarawak. Okay, yeah, and also that, back please. Also that we are conducting the feasibility study with the ENEOS #1 energy company about the transportation, produced MCH for the to covering the Japanese demand. And also this hydrogen production is going to go to supply to the local consumption of Sarawak, state of Sarawak. Okay, so Sumitomo is now considered that Malaysia has a lot of potential to cover the decarbonization, not only for in Malaysia, but also some other countries in Japan, like LNG methanation, MCH production, ammonia production, or biomass energy, or such kind of business field. And as I explained, the important point is to cooperate each other together with the not only for the private company also, but also the governments. We need some kind of the good collaboration ties in the future. Anyway, thank you very much today.
Okay, thank you, Yuichi-san. Later on, we actually gonna expand this further because Yuichi-san spoke about Japan's hydrogen strategy, the first national hydrogen strategy in the world. Of course, today we have more than 30 countries actually they are having this national hydrogen strategy. Of course, later on, Japan. I hope Yuichi-san will be able to share later on how this can be emulated in Malaysia. Our next speaker will be Joseph. Please, Joseph, the floor is yours.
Yes, hi. Oh. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. So my name is Joseph Straffolino. I'm from Air Liquide Engineering and Construction. Thank you. Today I'll bring more of a technology solution focus to the marketing introduction so far. So first, I think it's clear from the first two presentations, hydrogen has a very enormous role to play in the decarbonization of our industries. The use of hydrogen as a fuel to replace carbon-rich fuels, to use hydrogen to move energy from one country to another, and as well to generate low-carbon power. So these are all new markets for hydrogen that you can see here in the slide. What it could look like. Okay, you have the movement of energy with hydrogen being the core of that energy system. Natural gas still plays a very important role, which from Krishna's presentation would represent the quote blue hydrogen, and one of the big aspects of that would be to use the existing infrastructure, particularly LNG when it comes to Asia, to move energy via this existing infrastructure, but then you can convert this LNG to hydrogen by using CO2 capture and storage. The two main technologies that are an option, of course, many of you know steam reforming. This is the backbone of hydrogen produced today for fertilizer, for refineries. Steam reforming can be an excellent candidate for blue hydrogen production with carbon capture. It does typically require up to 2 steps of carbon capture, but despite this, 95% CO2 capture rates can be achieved, despite the fact that you need a post-combustion step. A lot of interest in autothermal reforming. Autothermal reforming is typically an oxygen-based technology where you can have one single source of CO2 capture achieving the same 95% capture rate. In the comparison between these two technologies, which we're doing very, very often for these blue projects, on the one hand, a steam reformer is much better known for hydrogen production in our industries. It does have the 2-step carbon capture approach, which can be, let's say, more expensive per ton of CO2, but avoids an oxygen plant, whereas the autothermal reformer is, let's say, a cheaper CO2 capture solution, but needing oxygen. So this kind of comparison between the two technologies, and by the way, this also goes for partial oxidation, very similar technology to autothermal reforming. In another aspect of comparison, you may see scale, and scale is very important when we talk about hydrogen projects, because from the first slide, the new applications of hydrogen can be tremendous in scale compared to what we see today for hydrogen production, maybe even a magnitude above. And for this, autothermal reforming can provide one other advantage, very, very large single train capacity, where you may need 2 or 3 steam reformers. You could have one autothermal reformer. So when we talk about very, very large scale, the autothermal reformer has these other advantages. In closing, because I know we're rather short for the Q&A, these technologies exist. These technologies are referenced. These solutions are ready to be deployed, only limited by the carbon storage aspect. So with the carbon storage in line for a project or for a country, especially Malaysia, these projects are ready to go. And we talk about blue hydrogen being a bridge technology with a very similar carbon footprint to green, not quite zero or close to zero, but maybe 95 or 90% of gray, can be an excellent way to continue to use the existing infrastructure with the added cost layer of CO2 storage, which should be, for the near term, rather cheaper than going green. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. One salient point that Joseph mentioned just now is on the various technological applications for the production of low carbon hydrogen, which can be part of a bigger hydrogen economy. And of course, Joseph has his expertise in terms of technology and also his background in Middle East, Europe, which later on we're going to have a good conversation when it comes to the subject on what are the right technologies or innovative solutions to produce low carbon hydrogen. Now we move on to the last panelist, Adlan. Please, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Chairman, how many minutes do I have? 3 minutes. We're running out of time. So I'll try to be very brief. This is about Petronas and the new company that we have built called Gentari. Let me see if this works. All right. Well, Petronas made a declaration that it will go net zero carbon by 2050. And as a result of that, there have been a lot of initiatives that is been undertaken, like improving our operational excellence, investing in technology, and so on. One of the main things that Petronas has done actually is to form a new company called Gentari. Gentari comes from two words, generating and lestari, which is sustainability. So you combine them, they become Gentari. And our mission is to provide solution to the world's most pressing sustainable issues. So included in this Gentari company, we are starting with 3 pillars. The first one is renewable energy, solar and wind primarily, and battery storage. The second is hydrogen, and the third one is green mobility. So we have quite ambitious aspirational goals to achieve by 2030. For renewable energy, we are targeting to have 30 to 40 gigawatts of wind and solar. Today we are only at 1. So we have a long way to go by 2030. But part of the strategy is to integrate our renewable energy business with the production of green hydrogen. Because green hydrogen is what will actually create the need to have gigawatts of green electrons. And the last pillar is, and our ambition for hydrogen is equally ambitious, which is 1.2 million tons per annum by 2030. So just to give you a flavor, 2 million tons of hydrogen requires 7 Bakun dams. Okay, 1 Bakun dam is about 2.4 gigawatts. So you can imagine the amount of renewable energy that is required in order to produce a relatively small amount of, not small, because Japan's demand for green energy by 2030 is approximately 3 million tons per annum. So this is slightly less than half of that. So just to give you a bit of context, it is a rather huge undertaking. And the third pillar, our target for green mobility is to have around 25,000 stations around Asia Pacific. So this includes charging infrastructure primarily, and other services such as vehicle as a service, where you can lease electric vehicles to make it more affordable for people to switch from ICE engines. Okay, we are at the early stages of the hydrogen economy. And as you can see, there is a lot of effort that needs to be put in place. From now until 2030, the focus will be more on policies, because hydrogen is expensive. And for you to encourage people to switch from fossil fuel to hydrogen, there must be government policies to encourage this. And at the moment, it's slowly happening. Yeah, it's slowly happening. You can see a lot in Europe. You can see in countries like Korea and Japan, but and countries like Singapore, very nearby. But there is still many countries that need to also adopt this sort of decarbonization policies so that hydrogen can become more relevant. So between now and 2030, we are trying to create the market. The market is not there yet. If you talk to there's a lot of interest for people who want green hydrogen, but if you ask them to put pen to paper to sign a contract today, I think it will be very challenging. So that's the phase that we are in now. But between 2030 to 2040, that's when we will see a lot of the projects and a lot of the technology that we expect to be more efficient and bring down the cost of producing green hydrogen will take place. And more projects will be FID'd and implemented. And then the supply and the demand and more liquidity will appear in the market. But we believe that between 2030 and 2040, maybe it's still point to point. Not yet so much the trading of hydrogen, but more point to point, from one country to another, for example. But 2050 is when the real liquidity in the market will emerge. And you will see it like LNG business is today, yeah, where there is sometimes oversupply, sometimes over demand, and then you got flexibility in the market. There will be some indexing. So that's coming, but that journey is going to be a long one, and I think we are at the early stages. Okay, so in Malaysia, we are doing a few projects, and for Petronas, I think we are working together with the hydropower suppliers to have one project on the peninsular side and one project on the Sarawak side for us to produce green ammonia in Sarawak, and in Peninsula we are producing green methyl cyclohexane, which is another form of carrier. There's a couple of smaller projects related to byproduct hydrogen, which has a lower carbon footprint, that we are also trying to make available in the market as soon as possible. We also have a project in Canada. We have a lot of gas in Canada, so Canada will be our hub for the production of blue hydrogen, and also we are producing green ammonia there as well. That's it from me. I hope I haven't taken too long, Mr. Chairman.
Okay,
we hope to have some question and answer after this.
Thank you, Adlan. Of course, Adlan, CEO of Gentari Hydrogen, he spoke about the the new business outfit in Petronas as the company actually steps out to offer clean energy solutions in the area of RE, hydrogen, and also green mobility. And then this is part of, as I mentioned earlier, Petronas stepping out agenda as actually the company pivots into new non-traditional businesses. Yuchi-san, I understand you have something to add on?
Yeah, sorry. I'm so sorry that it's my first time to make such kind of presentation in front of such kind of the big audience. So I made one mistaken that I said the different name of the company which we are doing, the Petronas and Sumitomo, or about the methanation is not ENEOS, it's just Tokyo Gas. I'm so sorry about this.
Okay, thank you. We have about 10 minutes for Q&A. Actually, I have tons of questions to ask the panelists. I hope you have a good hydrogen shower, green, blue, and then earlier gray hydrogen. But anyway, because of I'm conscious of the time, I'm going to ask one common question, which I'm going to ask our panelists to actually share their views and insights. Yes. 4:15. Okay. Yeah. Good news. We have until 4:15. Earlier, I was told I have to cut short by 15 minutes. So I think, guys, you can say many things now. We have up to 4:15. Okay. Latest news. We heard about the U.S. Congress passed this bill called Inflation Reduction Act that will actually subsidize production of green hydrogen by up to, I think, $3 per kg. Yeah? That's number one. Number two, a few days ago, it came out in the news about this Germany-Canada alliance to actually, for Canada, to produce green hydrogen and also later on to export to Germany by 2025. So I'm going to ask each panelist to actually share their views and perspective, in terms of the what the US has done to provide subsidy for production of green hydrogen. Will that become the norm later on? Because that's how the government actually, so far we've seen to actually kickstart some of this nascent industry by providing subsidies, tax incentives, whatnot. So will that be a wider, bigger trend, or we call it domino effect later on in some of the regions outside US, some other countries? Number two, I mentioned earlier about this Germany-Canada alliance. Will that also create another round of bilateral agreements when it comes to hydrogen trade between countries, or even between Malaysia and some other countries in the region? Okay, so perhaps Adlan, you want to offer your views first. Then Yuji-san, Joseph, and of course Krishnan.
Thank you very much. I think when we look for hydrogen production, we're always looking for the lowest cost of renewable electricity. We know that we need it to be very low, between 3 to 2 cents, US cents per kilowatt hour, right? Only then will you be able to produce green hydrogen at a price point which the customers can be is willing to accept. Yeah. So in this case, the US, by introducing this policy, will definitely make it very attractive for people to suddenly look at producing hydrogen in the US, because the government, if you produce at more than 3, they will give you a cash rebate or something that will bring your cost down to 3. Yeah. So that is indeed, if we have not been looking at US before, then this is actually a great opportunity to look at it because of this incentive alone. So I suppose the objective has to be decarbonization, right? So if you are trying to encourage people to switch from, let's say, mobility, from using your internal combustion engine to hydrogen or battery EV, right? Then this is actually the right time for you to do so in the US by establishing a network of hydrogen refueling station. Yeah. So I think the same philosophy applies in whatever country you're looking at, even in Malaysia. Yeah. That when you are working together, looking at hydro, then you're always looking at producing hydrogen at the best possible price so that you can encourage people to switch. Yeah. So for hydrogen is normally being used as a replacement feedstock for hard to abate industries. So refineries, petrochemicals, cement, steel, this is the one that you cannot replace through electrification. You actually have to have the hydrogen molecule. So I think the same thinking, and I think this is what the government of US realized, yeah, that it is very important to have hydrogen at a competitive price. Then it will encourage the switching to actually happen. Thank you.
Okay, so when we think about the Japanese market, the hydrogen production is going to be outside of Japan, and we have to set up the transportation methodology. Now Japanese government try to find out the ammonia, MCH, and the liquefied the hydrogen as a transportation system. In order to succeed the methodology of the transportation, the Japanese government put so much, as I explained in my presentation, Japanese government invested into such kind of technology, because that hydrogen problem is that how to transport. The production itself is in relation with the electricity price and the electrolyzer price, maybe. But you know that the transportation is one of the headache among the Japan, Korea, Taiwan. So in order to achieve that, the government have to put investment to realize such kind of transportation methodology. That is my point. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think what you see in the U.S. is that they've taken an incentive approach rather than a penalizing approach, where in a tax environment, if they taxed hydrogen, or sorry, if they taxed carbon, you see that price in the consumer level. Okay, so when it's a fuel, whether it's a chemical, the plastic of a water bottle would be more expensive because a company would just pass this down to the consumer. With an incentive program or a subsidy program like what you see now in the U.S., and by the way, it's not just on green hydrogen, it's also on carbon storage, which in turn facilitates blue hydrogen pricing as well. Here, it allows the company to maintain a certain financial return without passing the cost to the consumer. So it's basically absorbed by the government. So it's a very interesting approach. It's different than other, let's say, carbon taxation environments like in the EU, for example. But here in Asia Pacific, and particularly in Malaysia, you will see not a very highly regulatory environment yet, which I think gives the opportunity to look at how is it working in the EU, how is it working in the US. Japan has innovation funding as well, quite a lot of it as well. And you can actually adopt these. You have the opportunity to see what's working and what's not, and I think that could be very interesting in Malaysia.
Yeah, no, I won't repeat any of the points that the other panelists have made, maybe just two. First of all, I think we all know that the US has had, or has something of a checkered view on climate change, and that there are plenty of people in the country who are still somewhat troubled by the very concept and who deny that it's quite the problem that most of us think it is. So, to my mind, this is an extraordinarily encouraging development in that context. I think the whole act is, and the hydrogen aspect of it, I think, is probably, for most of us observers, more advanced and more accelerated than we would have expected at this point. So overall, I think, excellent news. The second point I'd make is that it will have, hopefully, an indirect effect on hydrogen, as well as the direct effect that others have spoken about, which I think is really important, which is as follows. I think we all know from the presentations that were given and our own reading of the situation that technology development in green hydrogen is absolutely critical. But the problem has been that with the outlook being so far away, that venture capital investors in particular, who are critical in green lighting many of these things that are required, haven't engaged actually in the hydrogen industry as much as you might expect. So the capital flowing into methane pyrolysis, to ammonia cracking, to liquefaction, has been relatively slow and small from the kinds of players that typically make big technological change happen. My hope is that this kind of development in the market where there is the most venture capital money will actually help to accelerate that funding, which, if you're an ammonia cracking startup, for example, might mean the difference between coming to life in 15 years versus coming to life in 5 years, which would make the picture that Adlan just presented hopefully quicker and faster. And by the way, when money gets invested by US venture capital firms, that tends to have a ripple effect throughout the globe. So I think even on an indirect basis, this is pretty exciting.
Okay. Thank you. Now, coming back to what I said at the beginning, we talk about this post-pandemic rebound and the energy crisis. We have seen the immediate, even we call it short-term focus on energy security. You have seen in the news, many countries are actually making a U-turn on fossil fuels. Now they are looking at oil and gas, some looking at coal or even nuclear. And then at the same time, it has actually highlighted the over-reliance on fossil fuels. And at the same time, we are looking at the need to actually diversify the sources of energy, particularly when we talk about the context of energy transition. You need to move away from this, we call it dirty fossil fuels, to cleaner and we call it sustainable sources of fuel. And here, to me, when we talk about long-term, despite whatever short-term issue that we are talking about, I remember saying about the let's not lose sight of the long-term, we call it gains from the accelerated pace of energy transition. So you still need RE, you still need those clean sources of energy, but at the same time, because of the cost of green energy is still prohibitively expensive, we still rely on blue hydrogen. So maybe I need some views here from members, especially Adlan from energy, one of the key energy exporters, even Krishnan, later on Joseph, and also Yuichi, with regard to does blue hydrogen has any future, especially with the current record high natural gas prices? And then is green still the way forward? What does it take for green hydrogen to be at least at par when it comes to cost of production? Maybe not now, later on. What does it take? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think about a year and a half ago, I was also giving a small talk, and we were talking about gray, blue, and green hydrogen. And I think the audience asked about pricing, right? So roughly for gray, the cost to produce is about 1.5 USD per kilogram, right? And then to produce blue, which is actually gray with carbon capture and storage, is double that. So it's about 3 USD per kilogram. But that time, the oil price was, I don't know, maybe about 60, 70, right? And green is double that of blue, so it will be about 5 to 6 USD per kilogram. But today, that's probably not so true, because blue, with the price of oil around 90 to 100, I think it's approaching the same, quite close to how much it's going to cost to produce green today. But it gives you a feel that blue, that was once thought to be as a transition, something that we can use first, while we wait for the renewable electricity tariff to go down, or the efficiency of the electrolyzer to go up, so that there will come a time that the price of producing green will be closer to the price of producing blue. Unfortunately, we are getting the worst of the scenario, where the blue is actually now, because of gas price, is just as expensive as green. Yeah. So which brings up a good question, very current question right now. How do you price the hydrogen based on gray and blue, which is gas? So that's easy enough. You've got kind of a solid base. As the gas price goes up, then the cost, the price of this gray and blue will also go up. But for green, it's based on electricity tariff for renewable energy, wind and solar, including the battery. So how this is going to be priced is kind of the current debate now. How do you convince the customers that green hydrogen, which is what the customer wants, is green hydrogen to be cheaper than gray? Which is somehow doesn't make sense, especially when you convert it to ammonia, right? The ammonia price today also is very high. It's about 700, 800 USD per ton. But the customers are asking for green ammonia to be sold at about 500 to 600. So something's wrong with that logic, we think. But to the customers, maybe they're more interested, maybe this thing should be cost plus, rather than it to be based on gray or commodity ammonia, where the price index is already available in the market. So this is the kind of debate that we need to have with our customers, and also maybe come up with a global pricing mechanism, not based on color, green, blue, but maybe it should be based on the content of carbon in the product that you are selling. So, but the world haven't gotten to that stage yet, but I think it's more happening on a bilateral basis. Thank you.
Oh, okay, so the price matters that Adnan explained, I totally agree with you about the opinion. That the most important point is that when we think about the total demand from the worldwide basis for the green hydrogen, so it's quite difficult to find out a location to produce the renewable energy to cover everything. So in this sense that certain tonnage of the blue hydrogen is going to be in the future still in the market, and that's going to be the same price with the green ammonia or green hydrogen price. And when we think about the renewable energy production, so it's not good fit for the big size ammonia production, like energy supply is not stable, so it's a little bit difficult to manage the to run the huge size of the chemical facilities. So that's why that we should be careful that everybody is talking about the price for the green, blue, or everything, that we have to be reviewed carefully about the technical background as well about that point.
Yep. Maybe try to be a bit more, because I think we're going to open to the floor soon, the last 5-8 minutes. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'll be very quick, actually. I thought those were excellent points that were made. All I would add is, I think there's an increasing backlash against blue, not just for price reasons, but also people asking, is this really remotely green at all? My argument would be, beggars really can't be choosers. I think the idea that we're just going to move from grey to green is fanciful thinking. I think we've got to use all the weapons in our arsenal over the course of the next 10, 20 years. And my view is blue's got to be part of that. Otherwise, we're not really going to diminish our need for grey, or to really deal with some of these hard-to-abate sectors in an experimental way. So,
and I'll quickly add as well, I think price is very important. I think we're all part of companies that care about making money in the end, but what I would add is actually two aspects which haven't been touched on. One is scale, and one is priority. So when we talk about green power availability, it's still today limited, growing at a very high rate, but nevertheless limited. If we talk about the electrolysis technology, it exists, but the manufacturing of these units is limited. So the prioritization aspect, I would argue, if renewable power is available, you should use it to decarbonize your power sector first as a priority. Whereas the blue hydrogen aspect should be reserved for hard to abate sectors, okay? The technology available to use natural gas while capturing CO2 and storing it to make hydrogen is already able to be at a very, very large scale. To make 300, 400, 500,000 normal cubic meters of hydrogen would require gigawatts of renewable power and electrolyzers. I don't have the projection of when that might be available in the market, but it isn't in the next 10 or 15 years. So in addition to price, I would argue as well these 2 points. Thanks.
Okay, I think we have just enough time for 1 or 2 questions from the floor. Actually, I'm squirming in my seats now because of time. Glad that we got, I think, another 5-6 minutes before we conclude. Please.
We'll bring the microphone to you, the lady in the second row. Just hold on one moment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the panelists. I'm Ayuni from the Economic Planning Unit. So I just want to inquire, because there have been a lot of talks about clear policies investment needed to be done by the government. So my question is, as opposed to the companies who, in Mr. Joss's words just now, at the end, who also care about money making, we would like to know what would be your recommendation from the industry's perspective on what are the form of policy and regulatory framework that the government should invest on. Because in terms of managing the old energy resources like oil and gas, we already have established acts, regulatory framework, and regulators. But this is a new terrain, which is a new, new business, new dealing, new R&D that need to be explored by everybody, not just the government and industry. So do we need to adopt and adapt from what have been done in the old way of managing energy sources? Or do we need new pathfinders? Do we need new Hydrogen Act? Do we need new hydrogen regulator? Or can we manage them using our existing Gas Supply Act? Or what would be your recommendation for us to consider? Thank you.
Well, policy recommendation is above my pay grade lah. But I can maybe share what we have seen in countries like Japan and Europe, and even India for that matter. I think for Europe is very clear. They are going on the government subsidy, right? So they are going to import hydrogen, and to make it affordable for the people in their country, the government is going to subsidize, right? For Japan, correct me if I'm wrong, Siso, they're playing a bit of a wait and see, depending on what is the cheapest hydrogen they can get in the market, and then they will introduce subsidy. I think it's a combo of subsidy or carbon tax, yeah? But the most important thing is they can achieve both goals, the decarbonization goal, and at the same time, they try not to increase the electrical price, as much as possible for the public. Yeah? India is a bit different. They are not going on the decarbonization approach. They are going more on energy substitute, right? For example, they import a lot of ammonia for their fertilizer. And this is grey ammonia at the market price. So now they are trying to use renewables to produce green ammonia domestically at a cheaper price than what it would cost them to import. So langsung tak ada, they do not have at all the decarbonization agenda. It's almost like a by the way, yeah, because the main thing is to turn their country from a net importer of energy to a net exporter of energy. So this is what I've seen, Puan, the different, in a oversimplified way, what some countries are doing as far as policy is concerned. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have run out of time for any more questions. So to the chair, some closing statements? Or?
I think because of time, maybe you can approach the panelists separately later on, right after the session. Of course, I know there are more burning questions out there, but if I can summarize one or two key selling points before I conclude. The first one, we actually concur that government support is key, and then perhaps later on there will be some kind of incentive like what is happening in the US now to make green hydrogen cheaper than what it is today. And then secondly, collaboration and partnership, especially between companies to companies, and also public-private sector collaboration or partnerships, that's a key to actually push the way forward for green hydrogen. And last but not least, I think most speakers, panelists agree that cost of green hydrogen needs to come down. And then at this point in time, we don't see it happening anytime soon, unless perhaps we talk about some kind of government intervention, just like what's happening in the US. I think that's the end of our session today. I would like to say thank you to all the panelists, and then maybe a round of applause to all of them. Again, we have burning questions. Please approach them separately right after the session. Thank you. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, big thank you to the moderator for the session, Encik Abdul Rahim Mahmud, and members of the panel. We now invite Tuan Habizan Habib Rahman, Authority Member of SEDA Malaysia, to the stage to present.